guess what happens? Their panic goes away, their anxiety goes away. In many cases, their asthma goes away. I mean, this is incredible stuff. Hey, Sam, how's it going?
Hey, James, it's so good to see you. You don't waste time. Like, I literally 8 on the dot. That's amazing.
That's how it is here. You know, when you're early, you're never on time. So that's the deal.
True, that's true. There's an acting rule related to that. If you're early, you're late. If you're on time, you're something like, I'm trying to remember what it was, but yeah, there's something like that. How have you been?
Been pretty good. Yeah, thanks for doing this. Stoked to be here and to carry on the conversation. We had such a great talk last time. Hopefully, we can mimic at least some of what we were talking about this time. We'll see what happens.
I just remembered it. If you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're late, you're fired. That's linked to acting. It's an interesting rule, but yeah.
Beautiful. I'm gonna tattoo that on my back just so I know.
Perfect. There's so many different ways we can approach this. And okay. All right. So first, if I'll just like to make a quick introduction, and yeah, then we can take it from there. Everybody that's watching from both camps, it is an honor to have you here. And I'm here with James Nestor, great author, writer, has written for the New York Times, The Atlantic, Scientific American, has spoken at the United Nations, has been on several TV shows, over 60 TV shows and radio shows, including the Joe Rogan show. It's great to have you, James.
Thanks a lot for having me.
So there's so many ways we can tackle this. I would like to start with what set you on this path to write a book about breathing. What got you interested?
It wasn't one thing in particular. A lot of people have that one magic moment where everything sort of comes together. But for me, it was something that occurred over years and years. I had been interested in the subject for a long time. I had had some personal experiences with breathing that my doctor or no one else in the medical field could really properly explain. And it wasn't really until I met free divers that things really opened up for me. Free divers are these people who can hold their breath for 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes at a time. Longest breath holds 11 and a half minutes, you know. And so once I learned that the human body was capable of holding its breath for so long and diving to depths far below what scientists thought possible, I thought, what else is out there? You know, what else don't we know about? What else were we told was impossible?
Yes.
And where else can breathing take us? And that's really what set me off on this. So this was a multi-year journey, both into this subject and writing about this subject. This book took me forever, an embarrassingly long amount of time.
How long did the entire journey take from start to finish in terms of writing the book, from start to finish?
Okay, writing the book is a little more easy to digest and define because I was casually researching this for, maybe 10 years, just on and off. I'd find something, find an article, would be reading a scientific paper and just sort of file it away. And until that file got so big that I figured that there was something larger here, perhaps a book here. So the book, that's a little hard to define as well, but I would say full-time. When I do books, it's full-time. I don't do anything else. Like morning, noon, night, this is what I'm doing. Sleeping, I'm thinking about it. So it was probably 3.5, 4 years. And, this book wouldn't have taken this long had the subject been a little easier to understand. But you could talk to 2 different researchers and they would tell you the exact opposite thing. So I thought, if these people can't even agree, these are medical researchers, how am I supposed to find the truth behind this?
Yeah.
So that's what took so long.
One of the things that I loved about the book, by the way, I've done this with Wim Hof on the first time, and I rectified it on the second interview. So here we go. And I know this is kind of reverse. Yes. Breath. This is by far one of the most eye-opening books I've ever read on breathing, and I'm a doctor, so it's just incredible in every aspect. I mean, the deeper I I studied the book, the more questions I had, the more I realized there's no way we can finish everything we need to talk about. If it took you 10 years to go through this, we have a lot to talk about. So hopefully at some point, I'm just throwing it out there, no pressure. If we could actually do another, that would be amazing at some point. One thing that I want to mention about the book is one of the lines at the beginning. It says, breathing is not an unconscious act. And this is something very, very powerful for people to realize, that we neglect breathing. And I mentioned this in the story, and we had this conversation, and I was talking about breathing specifically, that it's the first thing you do when you step into this world. It's the last thing you do when you leave it. We talk about sleep. We talk about food. We talk about water. We can last a long time without food. We can last 11 days without sleep. We can last 3 days without water, but we can only last about 15 minutes without air in our lungs. What I did not mention is, if you think about it, the other three elements that are important for healing are actually impacted by breathing anyway. And obviously you highlight that in the book as well. It enhances the food we digest. It enhances the reabsorption of water and water retention that benefits us. And it enhances and optimizes sleep. So technically the four elements are actually governed by the most neglected, and thankfully you wrote this book. Wim Hof wrote the book on the Wim Hof method. It's coming out, and more people are becoming more aware of this. And I'm so grateful to live at a time that there are a lot of people that are shedding light on the most important, in my opinion, element in healing, mental and physical. And the more you write it in the book, the more you don't say it, but you're actually implying it the whole time, which was fantastic to read. Okay. I'm gonna just jump on one topic, and let's start with that: weight loss. A lot of people. I mean, when I was reading it, it was fascinating to read the idea of weight loss and its link to breathing. And if you can breathe in the right way, you can actually lose weight. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. So this was not by any means a directive for people to go out and eat a bunch of cake and just think that they're going to be breathing themselves.
Of course.
It's not going to happen. But we burn fat with oxygen. So you need oxygen to burn fat, and you need to take in that oxygen efficiently. And if you're burning anaerobically, if you're only burning with sugars, you're just burning sugars. You're not burning fat. So the idea that the more efficiently you breathe, the more fully you breathe, can more efficiently allow you to process food, to process glucose, to burn fat. That this is basic biology. And no one would really argue with this. The thing that I found that was so interesting is, if we're losing, let's say I'm going to lose 10 pounds of weight right now over the next month, 8.5 pounds of that comes out through our breath. So our lungs are the primary way that we lose weight. So it's not, when people say I'm exercising, I'm burning it off. It's sweat and moisture is a very small part of this. We exhale our weight. So that I want to be very careful about this, because I don't want to make any crazy claims. But the efficiency in which you breathe can absolutely help improve how you metabolize, how efficiently you metabolize food, without a doubt. And there are some yogic techniques. I have not done these. I haven't seen too much science on it. There haven't been too many studies on these, where yogis will prescribe certain ways of breathing to help people lose weight. Apparently it works really well. If you think about it biologically, it's allowing yourself to work more efficiently, which your body's going to be happy in, not only the fact that it's losing more weight, but just because it's running in a state of coherence, which is exactly what you want to do.
So in general, it's a general, okay, so breathing in itself, optimized breathing allows for boosting your metabolism, which can help you lose weight. Was there a particular breathing technique or a particular style of breathing where you'd breathe in a certain way to actually amplify that effect specifically? Was there something specific to that?
Well, you can definitely increase your metabolism by doing some vigorous pranayamas. This is, Wim's done a lot of this stuff. And what isn't so clear is how much of that is the breathing and how much of that is the cold shower. Because I know just taking a cold shower a day can help boost metabolism. You can lose weight lose more weight that way,
Yeah.
more efficiently. But I've also seen with the Sudarshan Kriya, pranayamas, and even with the Wim Hof method, Tumo, you can start burning more efficiently, in that regard as well. I think a lot of this has to do with burning aerobically versus anaerobically. And so many of us are too often burning anaerobically, which is fine. You can burn that's why our cells can just process sugars, or they can process oxygen and sugars. We're built to survive, but it is much more efficient for so many reasons. 16 times more energy when you're burning aerobically. So I think that breathing methods and controlling your breathing, becoming conscious of your breathing, breathing these full enriching breaths allows you to stay more in that aerobic zone.
Okay. There was a chapter that I'm going to get back to that really intrigued me. It's about the amygdala, but I'm just planting the seed for people right now, and the idea of anxiety and panic attacks and stress. I'm going to just plant that seed and put it aside, and we'll get back to that. Teeth. I mentioned one of the first things that I mentioned in my story to kind of promote this interview, this conversation, was the idea of teeth and the idea of crooked teeth. And what's the link between, why do humans have crooked teeth? And what's the link between crooked teeth and breathing in general? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So this was one of the first things that I stumbled upon once I was into this book full time. I thought I had a pretty good route into the subject. I wrote in nonfiction, you write a book proposal, which is about 50 or 60 pages, lists all the chapters, lists all the people you're going to talk to, lists all the subjects you're going to be covering. And I spent a long time on that, 5-6 months on that. And I basically had to throw away 90% of it once I learned of this deeper story, so much lower down in the research. And this happened when a biological anthropologist mentioned to me, he said, "Why do we have crooked teeth?" So, well, it's genetic, of course. He's like, but then why did our ancient ancestors all have perfectly straight teeth? And I thought about my parents. They never had braces even, and my brother didn't have braces. I said, but I had crooked teeth and extractions and braces and all that crap. And he said, well, why don't you look at ancient skulls and you're going to notice something. You're going to notice their facial structure. They have these very powerful jaws. They have these forward prognathic growing faces, and they all have straight teeth. And I thought this must be impossible. And then I went to various labs. I looked online. All ancient skulls, any hunter-gatherer is going to have perfectly straight teeth. So what's happened with us, and I'll bring on my guest right now here, is what has happened with us is because of the lack of masticatory stress, of chewing stress, especially when we're young, we don't develop a proper upper palate. Our mouths don't grow wide enough. So it's because of our small mouths that we have crooked teeth. The teeth have nowhere to grow. So they grow in crooked, okay? And if you have a wider mouth, you have a larger playing field, teeth will naturally grow in straight. They want to grow in straight. But there's another much more severe problem beyond just aesthetics, beyond just crooked teeth. It's that a smaller mouth means a smaller airway. It's less room to breathe. This is one of the main reasons so many of us snore, why we have sleep apnea, why we have other respiratory problems. And this just blew my mind that I never learned this in school. And I had also been told that, we think of evolution as this thing that is always going forward. So whatever subsequent generation comes out of a species should be stronger and faster. Survival of the fittest, right? That's how it works. I learned that is complete and utter garbage. And if you look at the human species right now, we are not, quote unquote, evolving in ways that are advantageous to us. If you look at the amounts of chronic disease right now and so many other issues. So this just blew my mind. My whole book just took a serious detour from that. I had to start over again, which is one of the reasons why it took so long.
I can imagine. Snoring, sleep apnea. So crooked teeth are basically, okay, so the smaller the size of the mouth, the more crammed the teeth are because there's not enough room for the teeth to basically breathe. And at the same time, you were also mentioning the arch, the overarching mouth, which kind of compresses the space in the nose. And that basically narrows the airway, like you mentioned. And that basically makes it hard. One thing to mention is, yeah, please.
I was just going to mention this upper palate. Um, they've looked at kids who have been bottle fed versus those who have been breastfed. And those who have been breastfed, which requires a lot of chewing stress, helps literally pull the face outward and helps drop this upper palate down and widen it. So they will have later on in life lower incidences of snoring and sleep apnea. They'll be able to breathe better. They also look different, right? Because their faces are wider. So when this upper palate doesn't fall properly, and in the majority of us right now, it hasn't. I'm a great example of that. If you have a thumb, if your palate goes up instead of being flat and out, you have something called a high arch palate.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is that palate pushes up into your sinuses and it impedes airflow in your sinuses. So having this too small mouth actually makes it harder to breathe through your nose. So what happens? You instinctively breathe through your mouth, which actually affects your skeleton and makes it harder to breathe. So it's this downward spiral of all of these different elements that sort of come together to make us the worst breathers in the animal kingdom, which is exactly what's happened to us.
One of the things that blew my mind is one of the cases that were mentioned. Was it a 7-year-old girl, as far as I remember? Yeah, and 2 years later, she went from mouth breathing to nasal breathing. She went from crooked teeth to straight teeth. And here's a question that popped into my mind. Is it that nasal breathing, that she shifted to nasal breathing, did that adjust the space to the degree that the teeth actually became straightened on their own? Or did she do braces, or did she use any form of, are you aware of any of that? Like,
it completely depends, because your oral posture will dictate how your face is going to grow and how your mouth is going to, it will definitely influence how your mouth is going to grow, how straight your teeth are going to be, especially when you're young. Once you're set and you're old and 17, 18, it's really hard to influence any changes unless you go in to get surgical procedures. Okay. But when you're young, everything is growing very, very quickly and developing very quickly. So that girl in particular, and I saw, I would say, dozens and dozens and dozens of these case studies. What they're doing now, this is so funny. I don't know if ironic is the right word, but they are developing different procedures. Some of these are surgical, some are these retainers that widen our mouths to the size they were supposed to have been before industrialization. So to the way that our ancestors had their mouths. So by doing this, and they have these devices, there's a zillion different devices. They expand the upper palate, okay? By expanding that upper palate, there's more room for teeth to grow in straight, and there's more room to breathe. And so these poor kids who have sleep apnea and ADHD, which is directly linked to sleep apnea and dysfunctional breathing, we know that. So many of those problems will just go away because these kids can finally breathe again. And they look different too. So you can see dozens and dozens of these studies, but it's still so bizarre to me that we continue to take 7 and 8-year-olds and put braces on them and extract their teeth and make a small mouth smaller, which is going to absolutely affect their breathing in the long term. So it's just funny how science works, funny how the technology works, that the devices we're now developing are actually, a lot of the medicines and procedures we're now developing are just trying to return us to the way we were if nature would have formed us without, any of the influences of industrialization.
That's amazing. That's amazing. One of the things that I remember just blew my mind when I was reading is the little descriptions, little connections. When I was in medical school, I had a lot of questions about how things are done that weren't actually explained in the text. And I always would highlight them. Actually, if I go back to my medical books, I have areas of question marks. And what's interesting is they were triggering a lot of these questions. I was remembering these questions as I was reading your book. And there are a lot of explanations and connections. We've learned elements as well, but we've never made that connection. And I'm like, that makes perfect sense. The idea of the link between snoring and sleep apnea and the inability to go into deep sleep, people that have insomnia, it makes perfect sense. The reason why bedwetting occurs in children, in a way, there's a link to that. Bedwetting in children, the waking up in the middle of the night, nocturnuria, waking up in the middle of the night to urinate, waking up in the middle of the night and feeling thirsty. That is linked to sleep apnea and snoring and obviously mouth breathing, which that chapter blew my mind, by the way, with everything. Like from the beginning, from page 1 till the end of that chapter, you were just basically saying, stop mouth breathing in every possible way. And I thank you for that chapter. Thank you for that chapter. If you ever, like, it hammered in, like if I wasn't convinced on the first page, there were like 19 to 20 pages beyond that. I was like, nope, different examples. I loved it. I want to kind of summarize a couple of things as well, because this is basically for people to kind of have a kind of an overview, but at the same time, it's an opportunity for me to ask you also specific questions and to kind of break things down. So one thing, for the first few chapters at least, you have nasal breathing versus mouth breathing. That's one big topic. And then you have the idea of shallow breathing versus deep breathing. That's another big topic. There's more, obviously. But when people think about, I want to breathe in a healthy way, there's so many things to keep in mind. One aspect, which wasn't really, I don't think it was covered in the book, which was the quality of the air, because that's not what it was. It was about our ability to breathe regardless of the quality of the air. So one was the idea of mouth breathing versus nasal breathing. 2 was shallow versus deep. 3, lung capacity, which is linked to that in a way. And you broke it down so beautifully to the degree I was like, is he doing this on purpose? Chapter 3 and 4 and 5 were 16 pages each. And I was like, is he doing this to kind of create a metaphor for breathing? That would be amazing, because of less and slow. And it was beautiful. So let's get to the mouth breathing versus nasal breathing. When I breathe in air through my mouth versus breathing air in through my nose, pros and cons. It was hard for me to find pros, by the way, for mouth breathing, because you made it very clear. But if we were to break it down, because just mouth breathing alone, just for people watching, it's linked to ADHD, it's linked to high blood pressure, it's linked to sinusitis, it's linked to snoring, it's linked to sleep apnea, it's linked to cavities, it's linked to crooked teeth as well, because that actually amplifies the problem, really. So in terms of cavities, I have that question aside, but why is mouth breathing linked to all these things in general? Because it ties into a couple of reasons, but I'd like you to elaborate on that.
Sure. So I'll bring this fellow up again here. So if you see what happens when you breathe air through the nose here, you're forcing air through this gauntlet of different structures before it goes down right to the throat. And as air is forced through all of these different structures, it's pressurized, it's cleaned, it's humidified, it's heated up, it's conditioned, so that air is in many ways purified before it gets into the lungs. So just breathing through your nose, you will be able to get 20% more oxygen than equivalent breaths through the mouth. If you look at the mouth here, what happens when you take air through the mouth? Nothing. Okay? It just goes straight in. It's like you miss this entire filter. And if you look at the nose, this is an enormous structure here. It's the equivalent volume of like a racquetball. If you were just to take a racquetball and put it into your head, all of these different amazing sinuses are there for a reason. So the nose is implicated in 30 different functions for the body. The mouth is for eating. So if you're looking, considering cavities, and I talked to a lot of dentists about this, and they were convinced that the number one cause of cavities isn't just sugar, it's mouth breathing. Because when you're breathing through your mouth, you mess up the pH in your mouth, it becomes more acidic and becomes a breeding ground for bacteria, and those bacteria cause cavities. So it is very simple cause and effect relationship between those things. And what was fascinating, what I kept finding in this book over and over and over again, is that we have known this stuff for more than 100 years. You can go back and read scientific articles 100 years old where dentists are saying mouth breathing is causing cavities, it's causing facial deformities, it's causing crooked teeth. What happened with all that information? We just forgot about it and moved on. So it's and again with mouth breathing, you can even look at ancient scripts, be it in ancient Chinese scripts, ancient Hindu scripts, whatever. They were always talking about the dangers of mouth breathing and all the benefits of the nasal breathing. So the science is so clear. No one's arguing this, but I was never told to keep my mouth shut when I was growing up. No one, my dentist never said that. My doctor never said that. I mean, my mom did, but because I was talking too much. So these are just such simple things, and yet they've been completely lost. And anyone can do this, and the benefits are profound, they're measurable, and yet we just aren't clued into it, which is crazy. We're just treating all the symptoms of this. You have a cavity, okay, get it drilled out, use Crest, use mouthwash, shut your mouth. It's going to do so much more than any of that stuff.
It's the simplest and it's the most powerful. And one thing that was mentioned in the book that I remember, in Mexico, they hammer that into kids in schools, where keep your mouth shut. So that got me thinking, and I don't know if you've come across that. Is there a possibility? Are there certain illnesses because of that conditioning in the society of Mexico? Are there certain conditions that aren't present in Mexico, or that have a lower? That was just an idea.
I would have no idea. And there's so many different environmental inputs that can make someone sick, right? So you don't know. That was just a funny little anecdote from a friend who told me that. But since the book has come out, I've gotten dozens of letters of people who have been told the same thing from all over the world, from Asian societies. Literally in Thailand, in Russia, So what was interesting is it wasn't like keep your mouth shut because you're talking too much. Keep your mouth shut because it's disrespectful for other people. So there was a consideration of respect and personal health with nasal breathing versus mouth breathing. And if you look at least in the States here, 25 to 50% of the population here habitually mouth breathes, and kids are the worst. Over 50% of kids habitually mouth breathe. You don't believe me? Just go look in a classroom. I was doing the same thing, and we're told that this is normal. But when you're mouth breathing, you can almost think of the lungs as an external organ. So they are just so much of the pollution and allergens, everything else, can just be applied to them. Can just they are exposed to all of that stuff throughout the day and night, especially at night. A lot of people open their mouths at night. So when you're exposed to that constantly, that you have an increased risk of respiratory problems, you have increased risk of asthma, you have increased risk of neurological issues. We know that mouth breathing affects how you think, how your brain functions as well. So again, no controversy about this. The science is clear, and yet why don't we all know about this?
Yes. I received two questions. One is, how do we improve, or how would it be easier for us to breathe through the nose versus the mouth? How do we combat this? Is first question. The second question is, can we adjust the internal structure through switching to nasal breathing versus mouth breathing, even as adults? Can this change internally, or do we need surgical intervention?
Everybody's different. So some people have such chronically messed up noses that they do need surgical interventions, or they need some sort of serious therapy for it. What I've learned working down at Stanford for months and months, and talking with Ann Kearney, who's a doctor of speech language pathology at Stanford, she was a habitual mouth breather. She was slated for surgery to drill out her nose, her turbinates. And she started doing more research, and she realized that the nose is just like any other muscle, right? The less you use it, the less you're going to be able to use it. So she just conditioned herself to breathe through her nose all the time. And she noticed that her nose just opened right up. Within a couple of weeks, she could breathe very clearly through her nose. Then she went and looked at CAT scans of people who had laryngectomies, a hole drilled in their throats. And she noticed that between 2 months and 2 years, their noses were completely plugged, 100%. So the less this nose is used, the less you're going to be able to use it. So again, this is not a blanket prescription that this is going to work for everyone, but it's going to work for most people. You just have to start breathing through your nose all the time. At the beginning, when that's difficult for people who have been habitual mouth breathers, there's some sprays you can use. There's Breathe Right strips. There's these mute inserts that you can put in, which all help. These are training wheels. You see football players, they're wearing the Breathe Right strips. Why do they wear those things? To open up their nostrils more, get more air in. So all those things are fantastic. But once you condition yourself to breathing through your nose, it becomes a habit. Once it becomes a habit, this starts opening up in a huge way. All of those structures start opening up. The bone isn't going to change, but what's lining all of these bones is the mucosa, and it's all of this erectile tissue, which will actually dilate and open up. I've found this in myself. I try not to have too many anecdotes in the book about me, but I was trying this stuff as I was writing it.
Of course.
Had an incredible effect on me. And within about 2 weeks, I've never been able to breathe so clearly through my nose. And I've been hearing the same exact thing from hundreds of people.
The stats were insane. The experiment that you've conducted, that is insane. 10 days plugging the nose, and then 10 days plugging the mouth, just covering the mouth, taping the mouth in order for you to, and the switch is unbelievable. The snoring, the shift in the snoring, the oxygen saturation, that was ridiculous, dropping by 80 or 90% drop in oxygen saturation, which if prolonged would affect people's hearts, depression, it could cause so many problems.
Well, that's what sleep apnea is, right? You hold your breath, your oxygen sats go down. Below 90 is bad news. When it gets below 80s, it's really bad news. And the fact is 25% of the US population has sleep apnea, and most of them are undiagnosed. And this one Mayo Clinic study showed that half of the people with insomnia had sleep apnea, half the people with sleep apnea had insomnia. So it just goes to this thing where it's like we're treating kids with ADHD with Ritalin. We're treating their crooked teeth and their poor oral posture with braces and headgear. We're treating all of these different symptoms, but we're not looking at the core issue. I'm not saying breathing is everything, but it's definitely as important as the foods you eat and how much you exercise. Without a doubt, it's the anchor to all of this. And if you start addressing the core issue here, it has a downstream effect on every aspect of your health. We breathe 20,000, 25,000 times a day. If you're doing that inadequately, if you're doing that in a dysfunctional way, if you're struggling to do that, your body is going to break down. And again, not a lot of controversy, but who's talking about this? When you go to your doctor for a checkup, they take your blood pressure, ask if you have migraines, ask how you're sleeping. They're not looking at your breathing. At least my doctor has never looked at the breathing. They check your heart. They're not looking at your breathing. But how you breathe affects all these things.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just received a comment of a dentist that was talking about the idea that after reading the book Breath, I started practicing dentistry differently. So that's awesome. Yes. And to touch upon the idea of nasal breathing and mouth breathing a bit is the idea of, because in the book you describe a few more details about the idea of one of the shifts of nasal breathing versus mouth breathing is you get more oxygen absorption. So I could be breathing through the mouth, I could be breathing through the nose, but there's more oxygen that my body is absorbing when I do it through the nose. And two reasons that you mentioned is the nitric oxide is stimulated and increased, and what it does is it actually accelerates and enhances oxygen absorption. And then the second thing is, just by breathing in through the nose anyway, the temperature of the air amplifies how much oxygen the body's willing to take anyway. So with those two alone, that increases oxygen. Now, why would that be better? And that's attached to everything else. Well, the number one, and this is in medical school, third year, pathology. There are 6 factors that cause disease. The number one factor that affects everything else is hypoxia, low oxygen. And if that is addressed, the majority of illnesses would be harder to be created, because if the organs can function, they can heal. If the organs can function, they can regenerate. We're not giving the energy to allow the body to heal, and we're wondering why the body's not healing. It's kind of interesting, but that's really the major difference for me from what I've read. And in terms of like oxygen, it's oxygen. You get more oxygen not inside the body, but inside the cells. It doesn't matter how much. So that was the first thing, the mouth breathing versus the nasal breathing. The second thing that you were mentioning was about lung capacity. Like I could get a lot of really good oxygen in so they can go through the cells. But if I don't have the lung capacity to absorb that in order for the cells to take it, that's not going to happen for that exchange to take place. So with lung capacity, you talked about you were mentioning the emphysema patients and that amazing choir conductor. Like that was a fantastic story with a very sad ending. The last paragraph, it was like, oh my God. It's such a sad story that he was not recognized after 50 years of helping people breathe better. The emphysema patients that started to walk, but they couldn't even walk. Emphysema patients that couldn't even breathe. He enhanced the lung capacity, even though it's a permanent injury to the lungs, but he used what was there. It's just thinking about that.
But that was one of so many stories that had the exact same arc.
Yes.
If you look at medicine, if you look at science, just look at any science. You know, someone discovers something, it's poo-pooed for 300 years, then someone else rediscovers it, names it somewhere else, and wins a Nobel Prize. So this is not different in any way. And I just wanted to mention something with hypoxia and O2 deprivation is, guess where cancer grows? Guess where cancer starts? Exactly. And where it proliferates? In areas of low oxygen. So if your cells are constantly struggling to get energy and they're constantly shifting to anaerobic, which will keep them alive, but compensation is different than health. Another advantage of nasal breathing I want to mention is it's harder to do. It takes more time, right? Negative pressure coming in, positive pressure coming out. It takes longer. I just took a breath like that. That's how long it takes a nasal breath. The fact that it takes longer is good because that allows your lungs more time to extract more oxygen. When you breathe through the lungs, through the nose, you're also going to be engaging the lower lobes of the lungs, which can participate much better in gas exchange than the upper lobes. So if you're breathing through your mouth, you tend to be breathing into your chest right here. Guess what happens when I take a breath in? I'm going to fill my mouth. I'm going to fill my throat. I'm going to fill the bronchi here. But I'm only going to be filling a little bit of my lungs. So 50% of that air when you're mouth breathing 20 breaths a minute is unused. So when you inhale through your nose at a rate of about 6 breaths a minute, 85% of that air is used. If you're doing this 20,000 times, guess what's going to happen if you start utilizing oxygen and utilizing your breath more efficiently? All the other structures in your body are not going to have to just compensate just to keep up, just to keep you alive. They're going to be able to relax and restore yourself, which is what they absolutely need to do throughout the day. So breathing is not just a biochemical act, even though that's a huge part of it. It's a biomechanical act as well. And just mentioning Carl Stow, so this was a guy who was a vocal conductor who developed this breathing technique to allow singers to get more resonance in the voice, because he knows they would just breathe in these very short and stilted voices. But he was brought in after doing that for 10 years to help emphysemics, and he did what was supposed to be medically impossible. And he did it for years and years. There's x-rays, there's data, there's all that. He died, just as you said, not to give away the sad ending, but there it goes. And I had to dig and dig and dig to find people who were still doing what he did.
What was interesting is the concept of exhaling in a way, like the fuller the exhale, the deeper the inhale, because at the end of the day, you're kind of stretching the lung in order for it to kind of, it's a ricochet effect, a kind of like a rebounding effect. And that was he was a genius. He was a genius in the way he approached the body, definitely, no doubt. One more thing to mention about the idea of oxygen. When you don't have enough oxygen, and this is for everybody watching, again, this is about, okay, what about blood pressure? What about heart? Why would the blood pressure be affected by low oxygen? Well, when you don't have enough oxygen, the heart wants to compensate for the lower number of oxygens and molecules of oxygen in the blood. So it starts pumping more to compensate. But what it does, it starts pumping a lot more. And what ends up happening, it's overworked. And so the blood pressure goes up because of that. And you're basically burdening the heart, you're affecting the blood pressure, and that causes that cascade. Obviously, diabetes and hypertension are very strongly linked anyway. So it's low oxygen leads to a cardiac compensation that leads to cardiac overload and burdening, just to kind of tie that in as well. But
Beautifully said. An analogy I use, I have a couple old cars. So is if you think about a car and how a car works, if you're at a stop sign and you're just revving the motor at every single stop sign, the oil pressure is going to go up, right? You're not going anywhere, but you're just going to constantly be revving the motor. That engine is going to break down so much more easily than it would otherwise. If you were being very calm, using the exact amount of fuel you need to be using at that stop sign, driving around more slowly than just putting the throttle on it all the time. So when we breathe over our metabolic needs, we're stressing out our bodies. We're causing a lot of unnecessary wear and tear. And you can see this by breathing through your mouth. You start breathing like this, you're going to feel your heart rate go up, your blood pressure will go up, and if that happens throughout the day, and especially at night, it's going to be bad news. Increased risk of stroke, neurological disorders, metabolic disorders. I didn't know this, but sleep apnea is directly linked to diabetes. And that's one of the reasons so much of the population now has diabetes, because they're breathing so dysfunctionally at night. They're both overbreathing, then they're holding their breath. And if you do that for a third of your life, I mean, good luck. Things are going to be very bad for you. And look, if you don't believe me, look around. Look at society now. Look at how many people have chronic health issues.
There's an interesting parallel as well to the idea of compensation with hyperventilation and contraction. So people don't understand the compounding effect of when people okay, so low oxygen. How do I get low oxygen? Well, mouth breathing is a great way to get low oxygen. The other way to compound that is shallow breathing. So if you combine mouth breathing and shallow breathing, that's a recipe for disaster. Not only are you inhaling cold air that mostly is not going to be absorbed, the oxygen within is not going to be absorbed. And without the nitric oxide, it makes it even worse. But with shallow breathing, by not even having a full deep inhale, full exhale, or complete exhale, you're not taking as much. So that drops the oxygen level even further, which overburdens the heart. And what's interesting is, and I'm trying to delay the anxiety thing, but it keeps coming up with the amygdala. When you're anxious and you're hyperventilating, what's happening is you're not really increasing the oxygen at all. And it's just like the heart with atrial fibrillation or ventricular fibrillation, where the heart is trying to pump faster to get more in, but by pumping faster, you're compensating precision and control and full release. Because if it dilates, it's allowing full absorption of blood and then full contraction to push everything out. But if it's just doing that, it's not getting enough blood in. And that happens as well with the hyperventilation with the lungs. And it's an interesting parallel because they both feed each other. When someone's anxious, they hyperventilate, and the heart begins over time to kind of mimic that. It's trying too hard. It's like you're speeding up to the degree that you compromise precision, you compromise efficiency. And it's just an interesting parallel to have those two.
And this is what Carl Stau was researching with pulmonologists at VA hospitals in the 50s and 60s. He called the heart a secondary pump.
I love that.
He said the real pump is the diaphragm. Because when we breathe in, we suck air into our thoracic cavity here. When we exhale, we help to push it out. So not only is this helping to pump blood, but it also pumps lymph fluid because we have two lymph nodes right here below our diaphragms here. And when we take a deep breath in, we engage the diaphragm down a little deeper, and it helps massage these organs down here, okay? And it helps them leach out lymph fluid and toxins. When we breathe out, it uses that as a pump to help get this lymph fluid out and into our kidneys and out of our bodies. So I did not know this when I was writing this book, and this is one of the wonderful things of writing a book and getting letters. But I've heard from 3 doctors now who said, "Oh, you didn't mention the lymph fluid thing with the diaphragm." So the next edition, I'll put that back in, and I'm talking to them regularly because I really want to understand this, and they believe that one of the major benefits, not a minor benefit, of this deeper, slower breathing isn't just that biomechanical act. Of course, that's a big deal. More oxygen, more efficiently, good stuff. But it's that it allows you to both pump blood and lymph fluid out of your body. Your body wants to keep things in constant motion. These fluids have to constantly be moving. Whenever they stop and coagulate, problems occur. Cancer, we're talking about in areas of low oxygen. She was even saying, one of the doctors I was talking to was saying that lymph fluid can start coagulating to such a degree that it can almost like calcify. It can get hard. So when you see these people with these different areas that it isn't really fat, it's this other thing, and it's this, all of these toxins have been gathering. So that's another reason to take these fluid, deeper breaths with a big exhale. It's not about you are stimulating your nervous system into a fight or flight or sympathetic influence when you're breathing that way, especially when you're breathing into your chest. But taking these very fluid breaths will not only calm your mind, it'll calm your body, and it will allow you to purge fluids to keep things moving more efficiently.
I'm tempted to mention something about the diaphragm, but I'll pause for a second because I just realized that a lot of people that have attended, I was telling them it's going to be interactive. And apparently it's interactive between the two of us, which is great. But I would love for people to take away different breathing techniques that are simple, something for them to experiment with, something to try out, something to play with, something really simple. Is there anything, I mean, we could scatter them throughout this talk, but if there's anything that you could share that people can actually right now join us.
Well, people might be a little disappointed by how utterly simple this little trick is. I'm going to show it to you anyway. But, sometimes things don't need to be complicated. Yeah. Sometimes simple things can be subtle and really effective. So just by breathing in and out at a rate of about 5 to 6 seconds in and 5 to 6 seconds out, okay? This is not something that you should be really pushing yourself to do. This should not feel forced at all. Just very calmly through your nose, breathe at this rate, that consistent rate. As you're breathing at this rate, you're going to feel your heart rate lower. Your blood pressure is going to go down. Your baroreceptor sensitivity will vastly increase. That's what helps monitor and control your blood pressure. And you will get more oxygen to your brain. And different structures of the brain will start to synchronize. Different cells and different structures of your brain will start to synchronize. This has been studied for 20 years. All of the references are there on my website if you want to go deeper into it. But this is called coherent or resonant breathing. And it's the same breathing that's practiced during so many prayers through so many cultures.
Somebody was mentioning
to pray
right now.
To get these.
Yeah, someone was mentioning.
You don't have to pray to get these. You can pray. That's great. Totally. You don't have to pray to get these benefits. You can just breathe in this way. And if you have a heart rate variability monitor, or if you have a pulse ox, or if you have any other gizmos, put them on and see what happens to your body and your brain. Even if you have a Muse or an EEG device, look what happens when you breathe this way. So you take conscious control of breathing, which is usually unconscious, and then you can take conscious control of so many functions in your body. So I try to breathe this way as often as I can. I want it to become a habit after a while. And it's so simple. You can do it on Instagram Live. You can do it while watching a movie. You can do it walking. You can do it whenever you want.
People
You know,
can do,
breathing is free.
yeah, sorry. People can do this right now as they're continuing to watch this Instagram live and just do the 5 seconds, 5 to 6 seconds back and forth. My question to that, it's called, what was it called again? Resonance breathing?
Yeah, coherent or
Coherent or
resonant
resonant
breathing.
breathing. And there is no interruption. So it's a cyclical kind of breathing where there is no pause in both ends. There is no pause on the inhale or pause on the exhale at the end of the inhale or the exhale. You just 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. And you just continue having that seamless movement. So that's basically it, correct?
That's it. And as we go through this conversation, we can do some other little tricks with breathing. You can feel different aspects of it. But I was just listening to a podcast with Eddie Stern, who's this like guy that's been studying yoga for 30 years or whatever. And he said if there was one piece of advice, it would be to breathe this way. This is someone who does constant yoga, who's the world, I consider one of the world experts in yoga. And it was funny just to hear him talking about this.
Interesting
as well.
Yeah.
And it's you lower inflammation as well. I mean, I could go on. And again, you can check out the scientific studies that show.
Absolutely. One thing, since you're talking about this, what came to my mind was the idea of interruption. The interruption of that in the middle of the inhale or the exhale, or the pause at the end or the pause at the beginning. Now, obviously, there are benefits to pausing, but that's not what we're mentioning in this moment. But interruption. You mentioned a term that was so fascinating. I had to stop and just think about it. I was like, that is a perfect way of describing it. Email apnea. Can you please touch upon that? Email apnea, guys. Just listen to this.
Well, the good thing about my job is that I get to call up random doctors and researchers and try to convince them that it's worth their time to chat with me. And most of them say yes, which I'm so happy that that's the case. So Margaret Chesney works here at University of California, San Francisco, and she's been studying something called constant, she has some academic name for it, constant awareness, participation, something that has an acronym. It's also known as email apnea. So what she found is that constant partial attention syndrome is what it is. What she found is that when we sit down at our computers, it's morning, we open up our email and there's 60 emails and Instagram's going off and the phone is ringing. We stop breathing. So we view this as a threat. We get extremely stressed. And what do we do when we are stressed out? We either breathe too much or we stop breathing. And then once we stop breathing, we go. So this is reptilian brain taking over. So when we breathe this way, we actually impair our ability to think properly. We impair our ability to upload oxygen efficiently. We increase our blood pressure, increase our heart rate. All of these bad things happen to us. And our bodies can compensate like this for a while. But if we do this year after year, just as we had said before, they're going to start to break down. So she studied this with numerous NIH grants to study email apnea. And one estimate is that 80% of office workers suffer from this because we are no longer having to fight off a woolly mammoth or run for our lives every day. So we've become so sensitized to perceived threats that an angry email from the boss will elicit this fight or flight, this sympathetic stress within us. What happens when we do that? We either want to be quiet because the woolly mammoth is right around the corner, or we want to breathe a whole bunch so we can deliver more oxygen to our skeletal muscles, and brain to run really fast for a short amount of time. But we should not be doing this throughout the day. So she found that if you breathe this way, have this email apnea style of breathing, it can actually have the same effects, downstream effects on you as sleep apnea, neurological issues, metabolic issues, so many other chronic inflammation, heart problems, on and on and on. And I think about how I've been sitting for decades in front of my computer like this. Yeah. I can only take a short breath here. I can't take a deep, enriching breath. I'm getting completely stressed out every time someone emails me and asks for something. So it's just so a part of our culture that we've understood that this is normal, but it's not normal. Our bodies are not equipped to handle this kind of constant low grade stress. It's destroying us, and that's what's happening. You look at the top 10 killers right now, and they're all tied to chronic inflammation, and low grade stress.
And stress, amygdala hypersensitivity, high cortisol, inflammatory state. Inflammatory state exhausts the immune system crashes. Couple that with low oxygen, so the immune system isn't really nourished in order to fight off infection, to fight off anything else, then the immune system crashes further. So if we were to simplify it, it's the science is there. The science is there of what needs to be adjusted. Because again, when it comes to the email apnea, what comes to mind is, okay, so if we were, and I thought about this in the morning, and I wanted to share this with you, the idea of when people speak, they're mouth breathing. They're exhaling through the mouth. Here's what's interesting. I feel calmer when I'm alone. And what's interesting, this is not against people. I'm an introvert mainly, but I am an omnivert, and I like spending time with people. But what's interesting is when you spend time with people, we need to be aware of certain things that are happening that affect our breathing. We become more mouth breathers because of the exhaling, the constant mouth breathing through the speaking in and of itself. We are interrupted constantly. So our breathing pattern is interrupted by people asking us questions or making statements, and we have that kind of aspect going. And because of that, because we're interrupted, that creates shallow breathing because we kind of suddenly decide to care more about what we're saying rather than how we're breathing. And suddenly we start to focus on that, and that compromises our breathing in order for us to have that cyclical resonance coherence breathing. That's impossible in the presence of other people, in a way, unless you are listening. So it got me thinking of silent breathing, where actually silent retreats. In a place like that where you're not allowed to speak, that helps nasal breathing automatically or by default, I would imagine. I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, so mouth breathing is bad. I think we've established
Yes.
that right now. And science has certainly established that. But I want to be very careful because I've gotten some emails from people who have said, I laugh often and I notice I'm breathing through my mouth.
Wow.
And now I'm trying not to laugh or I'm trying not to talk. And you just have to be so careful with these messages.
Of course.
I'm talking about habitual
Yes.
breathing. I'm breathing through my mouth as I'm talking to you, right? When I'm laughing, I'm breathing through my mouth. Sometimes I'll breathe through my. This is perfectly fine. Some pranayamas have you exhale and even inhale through your mouth. All of this is perfectly fine. I'm talking about habitual breathing and breathing at night. Breathing at night when you're unconscious has to be through your nose. Throughout the day, be conscious of it. Breathe through your nose. If you talk to someone, don't step away and say, I can't talk to you because I can only breathe.
Of course.
No. So this is, and I think that we're such a culture of extremities. Like we have to go all the way. Like this is the problem that I have with some keto people. I've been keto for 3 years. I'm never going to eat another carb. That's not healthy. You have to be able to understand what the core issues of so many of these things are, and then to understand when to step away and appreciate life. When I've found people who are so obsessed with wellness that they're miserable because they're constantly stressed out about doing everything well. So they aren't enjoying life. But isn't the point of wellness to enjoy life and be healthy to enjoy life? So, this is not 100% of the time stuff, but it is something. Having said that you need to be cognizant of throughout the day and especially at night.
Yeah, the awareness really. I'm not saying don't speak to people. Obviously, the idea is to. That's how we learn. That's how we connect. That's how we grow. We develop. We evolve. Social connection is extremely important. But I think it's important to highlight, be aware of what's happening as well, because that makes you, I guess, more selective in how much you talk, who you spend time with, because we do need to be more selective because we may be spending time with the wrong person that is triggering our amygdala, that is actually creating an emotional reaction that is affecting our breathing, that is affecting us and our health. We tend to spend time with people that actually make us feel worse and actually worsen our health, and we're just thinking that we don't have a choice of who we spend time with, basically. So that's another question.
And we also start breathing the way that other people are breathing around us. I mean, we're
Yes.
A culture where people strongly influenced by everything, all the environmental influence, whether it's someone's energy or whether it's their physical actions or whether it's something they're saying. I did talk to some really tuned in breathers who told me that the best way of talking is to, speak something for about 6 seconds and then pause and inhale and then speak something for about 6 seconds. And this was the most awkward thing I've ever, I'm trying to have a conversation with them. I'm like, are you done with your point, or is it time? And they're not. So I tried to adopt some of that, and for interviews, it's a disaster.
Yeah.
So don't do that, people, unless you have compliance between people that you've all agreed to do it. But you're still going to sound like Martian. So there's only, don't get too intensely into the granular details of this stuff. We're throwing out some blanket ways of looking at health and how to enable your body to function more efficiently.
Absolutely. I have to say this, though. If you're in a conversation, or not in a conversation, if you're with someone else and they're talking and they're venting, they're just sharing something, and you're listening, a lot of times we wait for our turn instead of just listening to what the other person is saying to understand it. But one of the things that I noticed that was really helpful for me when I listen to people is I focus on my breathing as I listen to people. And what that does is they start unconsciously, non-verbally mirroring me, because I'm just focusing on I'm working on nasal breathing and relaxing myself and doing breathing that is synchronous. I didn't know that it was called coherence breathing. And listening to them. I'm present, I'm in flow. My breathing is not interrupted, and that's how I can be more present and more in flow and connected with them. And I give them all my attention. They start to feel appreciated, understood, but at the same time, they start to calm down because they're seeing my reaction to what they're saying. And sometimes when someone panics, and I mentioned this, I remember with Wim Hof in the ice bath. The ice bath is like a liaison between you and the unconscious mind, and the unconscious mind is like a child seeking comfort in the adult being you. Mm-hmm. And when someone is panicking in front of you and you start to panic, that kind of is evidence that what they're panicking about is real. But the moment you maintain your state, even in the presence of their panic, you're there for them, suddenly they start to calm down because they would realize, I'm in a safe place. What I'm saying may not be that big of a deal. It's not about undermining it. It's about them realizing that they can deal with it because I'm listening. And I'm not reacting in a way that suggests that it is as big as it is in your head. And I'm just calm. So they start to calm down. And all I do is I listen to them and I focus on my breathing. And that's something that we can do for nasal breathing that people can do. And you become a better listener through nasal breathing while listening to people, regardless of their state. And you get to calm them down, basically.
Well, you're sending cues of safety to them, of safety and calmness to someone, which will naturally allow them to put down their defenses a little more and to listen and to engage more. And this is so tied to Stephen Porges. I'm sure you know all of his polyvagal theory and how the vagus nerve functions and how someone's cues with their eyes. You can smile with your mouth, but if your eyes are very stern, you still take that as a threat because it's reflected in how our nervous systems or the vagus nerve is connected to our eyes and our ears and our throat. I mean, it's wild stuff, but it all makes perfect sense. Like you wonder why you're so comforted in the presence of some people, and you wonder why other people just send you off. And if someone is mouth breathing and they're breathing too much and they're talking too fast, I mean, my blood pressure goes through the roof. I'm just like, I'm there to help them if they need help. But if it's at a party or something, remember that when we used to have parties like 8 months ago, this would be the person that it would just, we say different terms for it, like vibes. Oh, I'm getting a bad vibe for that, but we're picking up on their biological functions and how they're holding themselves, and if they are a threat for us. This is again reptilian brain stuff. Is this person a threat? Is it safe for me to engage with them? When someone's that's a threat, and you're going to want to either run or confront that threat in some way.
Absolutely, yes. Is there, just to kind of throw one more for now, is there another exercise that we can just share for people to start using? That would be fantastic.
So it's a Sunday here, everybody. We don't need to be all pumped up. I guess it's a Sunday all around the world. So I guess in England and elsewhere it's approaching nighttime. So here's a great little trick. And so the coherent breathing keeps you in balance, right? You don't get too amped, but you don't get too tired. And that's how your body wants to be throughout the day. It wants to be in balance. But before bed, you want to start mellowing out. You want more of that parasympathetic response. You want to calm yourself a little more. So the longer you exhale, the more you're going to calm yourself. So if you take your hand and put it on your heart here, you can inhale to a count of about 4 and try to exhale to like 6 or 8 if you can do that. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Calmly exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale again. 1, 2. You're going to notice your heart rate starts to speed up on that inhale. As you exhale, it starts to slow down. So if you're exhaling longer than you're inhaling, you're going to be positioning yourself more parasympathetic. So a nice little breathing technique. Andrew Weil was a big fan of this. I'm talking to him next week, which I'm really stoked about.
That's amazing.
But he has you inhale to 4, hold for 7, and exhale to 8. So if you think about what's happening there, you're either holding your breath or exhaling for 3/4 of the time during that breath. That is going to put you in this deep state of parasympathetic relaxation. So we can all try it right now.
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale to 4, hold for 7, exhale to 8. Weil likes to do a on the exhale. That's fine. You can exhale through your nose as well and make that ujjayi breath, slightly constricting the back of your throat. And that sends vibrations to your vagus nerve to relax. So that slight vocalization is this nice vibration there, because the vagus nerve is running right up here. And that's a trick that I use when I used to fly a lot, that I would use on long, boring flights to go to sleep. And it's still a trick I use at night as well. So these are little tools you can have in your breathing toolbox to throw out at any time. If you feel you're getting stressed, if someone's energy is throwing you off, exhale longer than you're inhaling, and you will feel everything just slow down. It's fantastic to take your blood pressure before and after these breathing exercises, and I've seen mine drop by about 10 or 15 points. I have borderline higher blood pressure. And I've taken pictures of this. People didn't believe me. I said, here you go. That's 2 minutes of breathing,
As simple as that is, like the true power lies in the simplicity of things. The simplest thing. And we try to complicate things. Like life is simple and we complicate it. And we just strip it down to what's simple. And what's simple is what you mentioned, the 5 seconds in and out without interruption. Prolonging your exhale stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system, which relaxes you. Now, the exhale longer than the inhale is the ratio. But in general, a prolonged exhale in and of itself, if we were to look at that, it induces relaxation as well. And then you have the breath hold on an inhale as well, relaxes you. There's an effect to that. And that actually would tie it so nicely with the chemoreceptors. tie it nicely with
Mm-hmm.
the slowing down of the diaphragm, because there's something else. You slow down the inhale and exhale. And I wanted to ask you about slow shallow versus slow deep. Is there an effect that is different on chemoreceptors? Slow shallow versus slow deep inhale.
I think it's really hard to take a slow, shallow breath, right? I'm trying to take a slow, shallow breath.
Depends
If I'm
on.
breathing through my
Mm,
nose, it does really depend. But so chemoreceptors are responding not so much to the pressure, that's what baroreceptors are doing, but they're responding to the levels of CO2 and oxygen. So mostly CO2. So when we're at near sea level, they're responding to CO2. So what so many of us are conditioned to breathe over our metabolic needs from breathing like this for so often that we have very low tolerance for carbon dioxide. If we have a low tolerance for carbon dioxide, we're going to be off gassing too much CO2. And by doing that, we're going to be causing vasoconstriction. So if you breathe really 10 heavy breaths, you'll feel a little lightness in your head. If you keep breathing that way, you might feel tingling in your fingers. It's not from an increase of oxygen, it's from a decrease of circulation to these areas. So by increasing your tolerance for CO2, CO2 gets this really bad rap now because it's people only think about it in climate change. Yes, climate change is real. I don't care what you're saying. Yes, the oceans are becoming more too acidic. Yes, there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere. We know that.
yeah.
But your body needs a balance of CO2.
Yes.
And if you don't have that balance, it's not going to operate properly. And the problem is with a lot of people with slow breathing, especially people with asthma, people with anxiety, people with panic, you ask them to take a slow breath and they go, there's no way I'm going to do that. You ask them to hold their breath, they could hold it for 5 seconds. Okay, I've seen this a zillion times because their tolerance for CO2 is so low. By expanding that tolerance for CO2, by allowing them to have proper circulation, to breathe slower, to be comfortable with those longer breaths, they can then take conscious control over their minds and their bodies. And there are so many studies that have shown these incredibly beneficial effects of just training people to breathe more slowly.
Slow breathing was something instinctive, because I've been researching breathing for over 20 years, but I've never gone as deep and reached out to people the way you did. So I'm so happy that you've done that. I'm so happy that you've created this incredible book that has the knowledge that it possesses, and it's just I'm really happy to have something like that. It exists in the world because it does give awareness, and this is the thing that a lot of people need to understand. What we're after here, for everybody that's watching, it's to build awareness about the importance of breathing. And the fact is, if something's going on in your body, you need to understand that you have a tool that can help, that has the ability to help. You have something so powerful within you that you were born with that is keeping you alive. And we're looking for other things to help us, which is great. But this is something, this is a power, this is an ability that you are exercising all day anyway, but you haven't optimized what you already have. Do that first, and let's see what remains, and then we can find something else. But the basic thing that is free, that you could do any time, is just, you could do it at night before you sleep. You don't have to pay anybody for this, and you can just do it. You just need to know how to do it. And people don't understand the benefits of slowing down the breathing, the inhale and the exhale, changing the ratio, prolonging the exhale, holding your breath on an inhale. Breath hold on an inhale. There's so many benefits to that are in the book. There's so many benefits that I've discovered personally through testing what it does before even reading the book. There's so much related to that. And I just want to highlight the importance of slowing down. One of the things that trigger our amygdala is the fact that we are in a fast-paced, we lead a fast-paced lifestyle. And because of that, we're constantly rushing. When you rush, when your muscles, it's interesting how the body works. When your muscle moves, when one of the muscle groups move in a certain pace, the other muscles follow. If you slow down one muscle group, suddenly the entire body starts to slow down. Breathing is probably, the diaphragm is the most important muscle to do that, but any other muscle can. But when it comes to the diaphragm, Carl Stowe, that was the choir conductor, one of the things he did to teach people that have emphysema to expand their lung capacity, increase their lung capacity, is to slow down the inhale and exhale. And what that did is just triggered some. I just remembered Yo-Yo-Ma, the cellist, the famous cellist. When he was learning to play the cello, he was asked to perform the most popular Japanese piece, as far as I remember, where if somebody's passing by from one end of the school to the other, they would not recognize it. That's how slow he needs to play to practice it. And what's amazing is slowing down, even with a guitar, learning how to play the guitar, you slow down the movement between chord progressions. The slower you move, the more you amplify precision. The slower you move, the more you enhance muscle memory. And what better muscle to enhance its muscle memory than the diaphragm for deep breathing and control in order for you to expand your lung capacity. So I was just blown away by that as I was reading it. It just triggered that. I'm like, I have to share this with James. It's amazing. So we rush, we hyperventilate. If I'm constantly rushing through the day to get things done, I'm basically teaching, because I'm moving fast, for my breathing to be faster. And it will reach a point where it's not going to fully expand. The lungs aren't going to expand. It's not going to absorb enough air. And I'm going to hyperventilate. And that will trigger and will trick the brain into believing that there is a threat when there isn't a threat. And suddenly all hell breaks loose with the cortisol, with everything else that's going on in the body, just because of that. So slowing down the breathing is not just about enhancing and expanding your lung capacity. It's also about slowing down to cool down the amygdala, slowing down to suggest to the unconscious mind that you are safe, because there's no way for you to slow down if you are under attack. When we are threatened, we start moving. So one of the keys is to slow down, and slowing down the breathing is just a fascinating way to do it, because it triggers so many different things. The muscles slow down, everything else slows down.
When you think about it, it's such an interesting thing that we are now having to train ourselves how to breathe. Like we breathe unconsciously, which is great. I don't want to have to think about every breath. But then I was thinking about this a couple of days ago. I was like, how ridiculous is it that we now have to take supplements and now have to follow dietary guidelines because eating is so difficult? We can be malnourished eating. And then I was thinking, how ridiculous is it that we now are buying weights to put in our houses to exercise, to lift weights that serve no purpose and put them back down. And so we know healthy eating is very good for us. We know that lifting weights is very good for us. We know that exercise is good for us. But we're so divorced from how our bodies evolved for millions of years. Like the fact that our ancestors, even 300 years ago, would be like, wait, what? You have to eat all these supplement goo bars to supplement your diet because there's not enough If you just eat normal whole food, you don't need any of this. Why do you need vitamins? If you just lived a lifestyle where you're not sitting in front of a desk for 10 hours a day, if you're walking around, right, and you're lifting buckets of water, you don't need weights. Like, what a ridiculous thing that is. So I live in the modern world. This isn't a diatribe and to incite everyone to leave everything behind and go out. But it seems like most of the interventions that we're developing right now are just to bring us back to the way that we were supposed to have been, to live in this natural world. And breathing is the same thing. People are like, why do I need to breathe? I've been breathing my whole life. It's like, yeah, but we're now living in a different world where we have to get reacquainted with that so our bodies can function properly. And so I really view breathing, and nutrition and exercise as this holy triumvirate, right? And one of them, like you get cancer or you get, diabetes or you get another chronic illness, like food isn't going to do everything for you. Exercise isn't going to do everything for you. Breathing's not going to do everything for you. But if you look at these things as part of this larger system to balance the body, to allow it to do what it's naturally designed to do and to heal itself, then it starts to make perfect sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a statement in your book that I love. The greatest indicator, and they've done studies on, the greatest indicator of lifespan is not genetics, is not diet, or the amount of daily exercise. It's lung capacity, people. It's lung capacity. You want to live longer, expand your lung capacity to have more oxygen in order for you to heal and live longer. And this just blew my mind that this is sound science that is acceptable, and yet nobody is promoting it. Well, you're promoting it with your book. Wim Hof is promoting it with his book. And I remember you were mentioning that Wim Hof has done so much more to promote breathing than anyone. And he's one of my greatest heroes. And yeah, personal heroes, great. He's an amazing mentor of mine that I've known for a very long time. Incredible human being. And I've already had him twice. And his technique is just in the study. There's a study that is supposed to be finalized this month about the link between the Wim Hof breathing and the telomeres and telomerase enzyme and about lengthening. That's fascinating.
I was just corresponding with Alyssa Eppel here at UCSF. Wow. I'm going to be talking to her next week. She's the one leading that study. She's looking into rheumatoid arthritis. Who would have thought that breathing and cold baths can cure rheumatoid arthritis? It's like, well, if you look at the science behind this, it makes perfect sense, which is why so much of what he's doing is good for autoimmune function. And it's the same thing with Sudarshan Kriya, So, I just have to mention something. I'm a science journalist, okay? So I'm not paid to have opinions about anything. And I do the darndest I can do to not have an opinion. I do not have a medical background, which is why this book was such a pain in the butt to learn about the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve and the electron transport chain. Like, it's a bit of a nightmare. But I'm mentioning this because what I do is I go out in the field, I talk to the leaders in the field, and I look at the science and I look at the data. So if you talk about lung size, this was from a study that was presented to the U.S. government, part of the Framingham study, one of the most renowned, respected 70-year-long longitudinal studies looking at cardiac health. Okay, this is what they said 30 years ago, and that was a direct quote from these studies. And the fact that lung size is it's not considered at all. But then if you look at ancient systems, what is yoga but a breathing practice? I'm going to stretch this way. I'm going to loosen this rib cage. I'm going to loosen these intercostal muscles so I can breathe more easily. You can't have yoga without breathing, right? And so you start looking at, and Qigong's the same thing. I'm going to move this way. I'm going to breathe in. I'm going to move this way. I'm going to breathe in. So all of these systems were establishing respiratory health. We're allowing us to share in larger, healthier lungs as we grew older. They just called it by different names. So again, the science is so clear on this, but I just don't. Luckily, there are enough people at top institutions working on this, but so much of their studies and their data has just been hidden away in these academic journals. And that's what I spent years and years digging up.
I'm just loving that we're living at a time where this is being exposed, or there's more awareness, let me put it, instead of exposure, even though exposure is a good one for CO2 and chemoreceptors as a term, obviously. But in terms of awareness, we're having more awareness right now. With awareness, we can reclaim control to reclaim choice. And we feel like we're lost because we don't know where to start. We're constantly looking for experts to teach us. We don't know who to trust right now because a lot of people are claiming to be experts in something and they're not. It's not a great time, but it is a great time because in spite of this confusion, there's a lot of really good stuff that's coming out right now. And it's really about highlighting that. One thing that I wanted to get back to is the idea of the amygdala. that I put aside. That chapter was because it touched upon the chemoreceptors and it touched upon that. For people that are watching to understand this, the amygdala is a part of the brain that is responsible for emotional processing. And when we are triggered emotionally, the amygdala's high is just the activity spikes, and then the cascade begins. So that has been known for a very long time to be associated with fear, anxiety, stress, trauma, and that's the part. In that chapter, James, you mentioned something that I completely forgot about, the idea of chemoreceptors completely. And because obviously the breathing center, we're talking about the brainstem, which is a different part. And you mentioned a story of a patient that had brain damage to the degree that her amygdala was destroyed. The area where she would feel fear from is gone. And there was no way for her to feel anything. No fear specifically. And obviously the stories of what happened to her because she didn't have fear was a very interesting read, I can say, of the things that happen for someone that has no fear, just to kind of show you the benefits of having a bit of fear. But yeah, and what ended up happening is the scientists wanted to, and please continue, they wanted to basically see if they can induce fear in the absence of amygdala. Please share that story.
Yeah, so I was working with Justin Feinstein, who I just talked to last week as well. It's great that so many of these people that I had interviewed have now become friends, and their research continues, and I'm staying up with it. So he had found that this amygdala is supposed to be, the circuit of fear. And it is pretty much, that this is what was accepted for the past 30, 40 years. But if you don't have an amygdala and you don't have any sense of fear, and they referred to this patient as her name was SM, and literally she had no fear. So she would get in anyone's car, she would do anything, go to a haunted house, just no fear of anything. But they had her do an equivalent of a long breath hold. So they gave her carbon dioxide, okay? So she is supposed to have no brain structure at all that can give, she has not felt fear for 20 years, ever since she lost her amygdala. By inhaling carbon dioxide, she suffered one of the most heinous panic attacks and suffered from extreme fear. So Feinstein and other researchers reason that there is another circuit in our bodies, in our brains, that is controlling aspects of fear. And it is not routed through the amygdala. It is routed through breathing, the ways in which we breathe, specifically chemoreceptor sensitivity. Because Feinstein, who is a neuropsychologist, leader in the field here, had worked with so many people with anxiety, so many people with depression, with panic, with anorexia, with bulimia, on and on and on. And traditionally, all of these populations, they can't hold their breath for a few seconds without having an attack, without. So he figured that these quote unquote psychological problems have a physiological core root. And he believes it's tied to breathing. And this is exactly what he's researching now, which makes sense that you teach these people how to breathe slower, fluid breaths. Their chemoreceptors become more acclimated to higher levels of CO2. They still feel safe in the presence of healthy levels of CO2. Guess what happens? Their panic goes away. Their anxiety goes away. In many cases, their asthma goes away. I mean, this is incredible stuff. And again, researchers have been poking around in this area for 70 years. They were giving CO2 to people with anxiety, and it worked wonderfully. And then it just went away. And now Feinstein is one of the leaders who is rediscovering this. He's like, wait, why did we stop doing this? And there's no good reason. We found tranquilizers. When tranquilizers are a great way of numbing people, but they don't do anything for the core issue.
Bronchodilators, pills, steroids, medication. Yeah. I love that.
All this stuff works, everybody. Like, I'm not saying bronchodilators, steroids, these are absolute lifesavers for people, for sure.
Yeah.
It's not addressing the core problem.
Yes.
It's just not.
Exactly. Symptomatic treatment is great. As an emergency, it's great for short term, but the idea is to identify the core reason. That's one of the reasons why I left basically my medical practice. I believe in education over medication. And it's conversations like this, James, that I completely focus on amplifying so that people can actually see. These are the conversations that I want to have in order to build awareness. That we need to know that we have more of a choice of what to do, and there are things that can help us that could be complementary or may actually be better. But if we don't explore these things, we won't know. And if we're just kind of rigid in the way we absorb things as scientists and look at things, and we stick to what we have been taught without experimenting, as a true scientist needs to, you experiment, you test, then we're not going to progress as fast as we can. We're not going to help the people in need because we're stuck with the limited medication or therapy that we have that has a lot of side effects, and we don't really get to the core. Because it's really about finding what the root cause is, not what the branch. Like, we're just focusing on branches rather than roots, and this is really the issue. And that's one of the reasons why I left. So I applaud you for taking the time to go through this 10-year experience and write this book, because it's so important. What you mentioned about the chemoreceptors and CO2 therapy, a couple of questions that came to mind that I wanted to ask you was, is it possible, and I don't know this, is it that the amygdala, because I believe that the amygdala may be triggering the chemoreceptor as well, in a way. So the amygdala results in a breathing change. When the amygdala is there, when it's not removed or there's nothing and it's there, it's triggering a breath change, which triggers chemoreceptors. So they could work, they may not be separate. That's one aspect of it. The other is, if the chemoreceptors obviously the chemoreceptors with SM has proven that there's another circuit, I would imagine, in the brain, then my question is it possible, did they find that circuit? Because maybe the amygdala was always there, hiding another circuit in the brain that was just overshadowed by the amygdala, and this situation revealed it.
These are great questions, and this is exactly what Feinstein's so fascinated with discovering right now. He told me about some studies with some epileptics where they open their head and they put electrodes in different areas of their brain to try to figure out what's going on. When you stimulate the amygdala, people stop breathing. So, and they stop and they don't feel any discomfort. And he said that they watched a patient stop breathing for a minute, no discomfort, took the electrode off, started breathing normally again. So we don't know what that relationship is, but there is an intimate relationship. Feinstein believes that the amygdala may be down-regulating chemoreception, that it's not going, like the amygdala isn't the powerhouse, it's not the control center, but there's a relationship in which it is able to blanket over too active, too sensitive chemoreceptors. So he believes it could be a safety mechanism, the amygdala is. But this is all hypothetical. No one knows. He really wants to get into this research. I will mention, I want to be very clear that in no way am I trying to ridicule or criticize doctors in the established. There's 2 doctors in my family. These guys are doing everything they possibly can do within the system. So when they have 5 minutes to help someone, they're going to give them, this person can't breathe. Here's a bronchodilator. Works freaking great. you know? So by no means any healthcare giver, but what I've found is they're as frustrated as the patients because they don't have any time to spend with people. And it's the same thing with Feinstein, is there is just not a lot of funding for this stuff, because at the end of the day, what's the product that you're going to come up with? It's breathing. It's free. You can't trademark it. It's available for everyone. I was talking to the chief of a very large lab at a very prestigious research institution, one of the top institutions in the world. Everything he does at his lab has to be privately funded by one philanthropist. So this is a guy at the very top of his field at a top institution, and there's no money for him to do research in breathing and nasal breathing. So it's more of a systemic problem than it is an individual problem.
Of course.
It's nothing to do with doctors. It has to do with how we've built a system that is allowing people to be on 12 different drugs for 12 different symptoms. When the core issue is usually one core issue. You cure that core issue, then all the symptoms go away. That's not very good for the economy.
No, it's not.
You cure one core issue. And I'm sorry to sound like too much of a cynic here, but I can only hear this from so many people at Harvard, at Stanford, at UPenn, in so many different ways before you're like, I think they're kind of making sense now.
Absolutely. There's another factor linked to the chemoreceptors and the amygdala as well that I don't know if it's being addressed as well. The link between the nervous system and within the heart, linking to the chemoreceptors and the amygdala, because I remember at the Heart Math Institute they were doing research on the idea that 80%, and they were collaborating with Oxford University. When I was in Oxford University a couple of years ago, they were talking about this, the idea of that 80% of the communication from the heart and the brain, from between the heart and the brain, is from the heart to the brain, which blew my mind. So there is something there linked to the amygdala, chemoreceptors, the breath and the heart and the nervous system surrounding that area and how it connects to the brain. It's fascinating.
With the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body, vagus comes from vagrant. It's the same root for vagrant, something that's wandering. This is wandering nerve. 80% of the nerves are coming from the body to the brain. Okay, only 20% from the brain to the body. So what is happening in the body, the way you move, the way you breathe, that can overtake what is happening in the brain. You can strongly influence how you process thoughts. So it doesn't shock me that 80% of the messages are coming from the heart to the brain. This is what we're discovering right now. I do not have the answers for this. Actually, nobody does. That relationship between the amygdala, chemoreceptors, breathing, how it works. I do know, though, that these slow breathing exercises, which have been very well studied, their effects on all of these chronic problems. We know this stuff works. We think it has to do with chemoreceptor sensitivity. The great thing about breathing is it's so easy to measure. It's not just subjective. It's like, breathe this way, tell me how you feel. We can put sensors all over your body and we can see what's happening in your brain and body when you breathe a certain way. But what's interesting is, yes, we know it's working. There's objective, quantified data showing that it's working. But what is happening within these structures? More mysteries to unfold, which is very exciting. I think in the next few years, we're going to learn a lot more about this area.
And I to be honest, I cannot wait. And I think everybody that's watching and people that are into breathing cannot wait. I have a question related to the inhale for the CO2 specifically. If you compare slow breathing to increase carbon dioxide level versus holding your breath on an inhale, would it be fair to assume that holding your breath on an inhale will increase that more intensely than just constant slow breathing?
For sure.
Okay.
Which is why breath holding has been part of yoga, pranayama for thousands and thousands of years. So it's an essential part of it. So it happens, that accumulation of CO2 happens much quicker when you're holding your breath.
But yeah.
And this is also one of the reasons why, if any of the people watching out there are familiar with Buteyko breathing is just learning how, conditioning your body to be more comfortable breathing less. That's all it is. And so you can hold your breath doing this. In Buteyko, there's something called a control pause. Every morning you wake up, you exhale, hold your nose, and you see how long you can comfortably hold your breath. And they've found that with athletes, any athlete that can hold his or her breath longer than 25 seconds has an 89% chance of not suffering from any dysfunctional breathing. So this is such a great diagnostic. If you hold your breath and you are uncomfortable after about 5 or 6 seconds, there is a very good chance you are suffering from, actually, I won't say a chance, you are suffering from dysfunctional breathing throughout the day and probably throughout the night. That's how it is, because of chemoreceptor sensitivity. So you have to have a really wide aperture of chemoreceptor flexibility in your body to be able to breathe normally throughout the day. And that's what Buteyko, that's what Papworth does, that's what different pranayamas, I mean, you call it Qigong, you call it a zillion different names. It's all the same thing.
So just to clarify the idea of holding your breath versus slowing down, holding your breath intensifies that sensitivity, the increase in the buildup of CO2, but slowing down your breathing in and out, that is a softer, more gentle way of actually doing it. But we can always do both. There was something that you mentioned in that chapter as well about a certain exercise, an ancient exercise where you hold your breath and you count to 100. And you clench your fists. And the question I had, because it wasn't clear, is do you need to clench a fist, or can you just hold your breath without doing that? That's the first question. And I'll stop there, and I'll ask the second one after.
So that was from a book of the Chinese Tao that was about 1,000 years old. And there's 8 books of the Tao, which dedicated to breathing, only breathing. That's it. And they detail all of the awful things that are going to happen to you if you breathe through your mouth. And then they detail all the wonderful things that are going to happen to you if you learn how to softly hold your breath, breathe slowly, and breathe through your nose. This is 1,000 years old, everybody. It's available for everyone. So that one exercise, it just blew my mind because it was so similar to what Feinstein had been saying about chemoreceptor sensitivity, flexibility specifically, about this ability to hold your breath longer, how you can make your chemoreceptors more flexible so you'll be able to breathe unconsciously more slower. The specifics of that exercise, I can't speak to. I quote, it was so complex, I just quoted the exact thing. It was like, if you guys can make something of this, that's cool. But the point of it was to learn. And I don't know if you've done this in breathing classes. I've done this in a lot of yoga breathing classes, pranayama classes. I've also done it in Wim Hof, where you can hold your breath and you tense your entire body and then you relax it completely. It's like weightlifting for your nervous system, right?
I like that.
You completely amp it up and then you relax it. So it was fascinating to see that described in the Chinese text. It was also fascinating to say, if you can do this and count to 100, they said, you will need no medicine. You will be healthy. That was the quote from it. I said, wow, that's powerful.
That is amazing. The second question related to that, just to close that loop, is when you take a deep breath in and you hold it, and then you exhale, I wasn't clear on whether to exhale completely and then do it again and take a deep breath in and hold it, or to exhale partially but not fully, and then do the inhale again. I wasn't sure about that. So did you come across any?
I wish those details were in there, and they aren't. Okay. That was just the exact excerpt from this book, and I had those same questions. I was like, this is cool, but little more details. At least in pranayama, there are specific details of how to do it. I mean, even little too many details in some regards. But these Chinese texts are pretty mystical. But it doesn't say, am I exhaling half full? Am I exhaling entirely? I don't know. It's 1,000 years old. I wish those guys were around right now. We could ask them, but I'm not sure.
Or we can test them ourselves, which definitely is something I'm going to do.
Or we can test them. Absolutely.
Yes. James, we had this conversation in the prep, and we had a conversation about how long will we go, and we're 15 minutes away from 2 hours, and I told you my concern. My amygdala was kind of firing up in terms of the idea of, if we go beyond 2 hours, I'm concerned that Instagram is not going to let me upload this, and I think a lot of people would benefit from this, from what you are sharing here. And so I'm
2 hours. What are you talking? It's been 10 minutes in my mind. I think we could talk for days. Literally, that's blowing my mind. Wow. Okay.
Well, I would be honored to have you again, because I mean, we just seriously scraped the surface in terms of the points and the questions I have. I mean, I have a lot of questions related to this, and breathing is one of the biggest passions of mine. So this is like an amazing conversation for me that I was really excited to have. So
anytime, for real. Thank you for your interest. Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you everyone who is still listening for 2 hours. Wow. That's as long as the Godfather. Hopefully some of this was of benefit. And remember, slow breaths, everyone. Breathe less. There you go, through the nose.
Exactly.
That's all you need to know.
Exactly. Thank you so much, James, for taking the time. And
Sure.
I wish you an amazing day, an incredible month, and we will stay connected. Definitely.
Right on.
Thank you.
Sounds great. Bye, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Bye, James.